Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along today. Yeah, as Jill said, we've had lots of questions in advance. So this is clearly an area or topic that is in demand. So we'll do our best to cover all of the questions or the sort of general themes of the questions that we've had in advance over the course of the session this morning. But Emily and I are very happy for people to just jump in and just fire questions at us at any point. So if something pops into your head as we're going along, please feel free to do so.
Can I just say, sorry, Emily, I didn't realise my head was not the first. Welcome, Emily, as well. I just didn't click because it's early in the morning. You were joining James as well, but thank you as well for coming along.
No problem. Right, I'm just going to do the dreaded talking and mumbling while I share my screen. So do bear with me while I do that. We use Teams a lot more now than Zoom, so I'm not as fantastic with Zoom. Boom, there we go. Can we see that?
Yep, that's great.
That's all okay, fantastic. That will all fall apart when we try and watch a YouTube video in a bit, but for now we're okay. Good morning, everyone. So Emily and I rather are from Southampton CAMHS, so we'll explain a little bit about who we are in a moment. But this morning we're going to try and cover two fairly big topic areas, so puberty and understanding sexual relationships, with a real focus on children who have neurodiversity and learning disabilities, or learning disabilities, I should say. So yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're also very aware that the concerns and questions that parents tend to have around this topic tend to be very unique to their situation. So we're going to talk very generally about this stuff. But as we said at the start, if you have any questions or any specific situations that we're not quite answering for you, please absolutely jump into the chat or feel free to just take yourself off mute and ask us questions. We're more than happy for this to be as interactive and as useful as possible. So yeah, the invitation's there. Right, fantastic. So should we just say about who we are? So Emily, do you want to go first, introducing yourself? Save my voice.
So my name is Emily Charland and I am a trainee clinical associate psychologist working in the Southampton CAMHS.
Fabulous. And I'm James Knight, so I'm a clinical psychologist and I also work in Southampton CAMHS. I'm just going to have a crack at turning on presenter view, which hopefully now you can't see. Have I got that right, Emily? But I can see presenter view. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah, so we both work in Southampton CAMHS. So I guess what we would say is that neither of us are sexual health experts. Neither of us are biological necessarily experts. We're not puberty experts, but we both have, I guess, a fair amount of, well, quite a bit of experience working with autism, learning disabilities, and we're psychologists. So we understand, our training is understanding the human mind. So we're going to try and use that understanding, I guess, today and extrapolate that onto sexual relationships and puberty and some of the difficulties that we often see with the families that we've worked with in the past. So yeah, I guess just that caveat to start with, I guess. Wonderful. That's our very rough agenda. So we are going to try and start by covering some of the general themes and the conversations that always come up around this stuff, and will be kind of themes that come up a lot today. We wanted to get that in early, and then yeah, we'll move on to puberty and then latterly sexual relationships. So as I say, there are some just general principles about these topics that we think are just really good to kind of get in there early and talk about, because they're going to come up a lot, and rather than just keep iterating them through the talk, we thought it would be good just to really map them out at the start. So I guess from our perspective, the most important thing to remember is the reason this can be so difficult for so many people is because they involve very abstract concepts. So developing puberty, sexual relationships are very sophisticated social and nuanced biological kind of processes, and they involve very, very abstract concepts, things that are very hard to define, very hard to talk about. They're kind of up there in the kind of ether in the world, but they're hard to pin down. So I'm talking about things like time, age, trust, emotions, pleasure, consent. These are all very difficult things for young people, particularly with autism anyway, to understand. So one of the things that we're going to talk about a lot today is about education and making these concepts as concrete as physically possible, so making them as live and as easy to understand for these people as we possibly can, which is why I've got a car being filled with concrete there. That underpins everything we'll talk about. You do that in different ways depending on what you're trying to discuss or what the issue is, but we're going to keep coming back to this idea of making these concepts as concrete as possible. And some of the ways that we will do this. So I'm sure that none of these ideas are particularly new for anyone. And I guess that's the other thing about thinking about sexual relationships in puberty is, although they may feel a little bit uncomfortable to talk about at times, the kind of techniques and the ways of having these discussions are no different to any other area of difficulty or challenge that you may have helping your child to learn about something new. It's exactly the same as anything else. But sometimes it can just feel a little bit awkward, and you can, I guess, there's a concern and a worry around doing things wrong, or being a bit clumsy with language. So we just kind of want to demystify a lot of that and say that this is the same as anything else. It's just about helping your child learn something new in all the usual ways. So as I say, those bullet points there, social stories, visual instructions, showing them what to do and helping them get started with certain areas, reward charts, step-by-step instructions for showering. These are all things that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Some of them will obviously need adapting for your young person and the way that their mind works, their age, their experience, their social awareness, all those kinds of things. But the principles are always going to be the same. And I guess the bottom bit, the underlying message there, clear and direct language. I guess we're mindful that lots of parents in their kind of, I don't know, anxiety around talking about these difficulties might try to fluff it up a little bit and can get a bit wordy and can use synonyms and things like that. I think the best way to go here is just to be very clear, very direct, very explicit in what you're saying. Across puberty and across sexual relationships, across any area, it's really important to be as clear and as direct as you possibly can. We will talk about some ways of doing that, but really it's nothing particularly complicated. It's all intentionally very simple. It's just about making things as concrete and as visual, I guess, as possible. So those are kind of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about using flow charts and decision trees and social stories and all these kinds of stuff as we go through. But yeah, just initially, those are some of the key things that we want you to hold in mind as we go through. It's about being concrete, it's about being clear, it's about being direct and not kind of skirting around the edges at all. Fab. Okay, so got any questions, slides straight away, just in case anyone wants to jump in before we start talking about puberty on anything we've talked about so far, or anything anyone wants to put anything in for us to think about or come back to later on. So I'm just going to give a moment for anyone to pipe up. Nothing in the chat, is there, Jill?
No, nothing in the chat. I really like that idea of the concrete. That's already struck a chord with me in terms of thinking about my own kids and making really clear and direct language is. Yeah, I think that's a great concept already, so thank you.
Yeah, I think they're very complicated constructs, aren't they? They're very complicated discussions to have, and they're very complicated, processes that people have sophisticated social interactions, isn't it, really? And making that as simple as we possibly can is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, so we'll move on then to puberty, and I'll hand over to Emily.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by talking through some of the different areas of puberty that your children will come up against. So starting with periods. So following on from what James was saying with the facts, so that they can last 3 to 7 days, it's approximately every 28 days, and that will happen from around being a teenager until around late 40s. But explain there are definitely individual differences within that. So some periods are going to last 8 days, some are going to have them every 32 days. There's a lot of variety in there. But just trying to make sure that your young person knows that it's really normal, and it doesn't mean that they're ill. It doesn't mean they're injured. It's a normal amount of blood to lose. It doesn't mean that anything's wrong with them. And it's really important to prepare them for the physical symptoms that are going to come alongside with the period, like the cramps, the aches, the headaches. And it can be really helpful to consider using a scale like the one below, just to help them communicate their pain to you, because some people do have such significant pain that needs medical intervention. Some then sits within kind of a tolerable range that painkillers at home can manage, but helping them be able to communicate that to you is really important, because like I say, it's going to be so individual. And it's also important to explain that there's going to be an emotional impact of periods, so they may be more likely to feel tired, irritable, they might find it harder to concentrate, and just again preparing them for this so they know that again it's normal, then there's a reason why they might be feeling this way. And it's important to consider their own sensory needs when choosing period products. So there's pads, tampons, period underwear, there's moon cups, there's lots of different choice, and it might be a case of trial and error for your individual young person. But again, there's no right or wrong for them. It's just working through with them and letting them have that kind of freedom to explore, I think. Thank you, James. So how to kind of prepare for them. So I mean, talking about it as early as possible is going to help. Like I say, most young people start in teenagers, but that is not by all means a fast rule. So the more they're aware, the easier it's going to be. Demonstrating how to use sanitary products in advance. So there's some social stories on the next slide, but also with pads, you can get a red pen and kind of show them what it might look like, how it fits in their underwear, what it might look like when they need to change it. Support them in setting timers and reminders for when they might need to change period products, and also a calendar for when their period may be due, so then they can be aware that it's coming up, prepare by putting things in their bag, making sure they've got things at home. And also it might be really important to identify a person they can talk to if they start their period at school, because we often picture that it will happen at home, you as a parent will be there to talk them through it, but as we know, life isn't always that straightforward. So having somewhere that they can go, make sure they know that they've got it in their bag, and just being aware of that, and support them with, like I say, carrying spare underwear as well and period products with them. So thank you. Yeah, so here are some example some like social stories for using sanitary pads. There are lots of different social stories out there online for periods, so if you just have a look and find one that works best for you, but to show how to use them, that seems to be the main one. I would also think it's important to highlight that it's really normal for different timings, so not to compare with other young people in their school, in their friendship group. So if they start later, that's normal. If they start first, that's normal. It's not everyone on their 13th birthday, that's how they wake up. So just being aware of that, of kind of normalizing that for them as well.
Yeah, just a couple of other things I was going to add onto that on the back of what you were saying. I think one of the difficulties that we see with children, particularly this is more associated with autism and learning difficulties, is there's a real visceral reaction, a strong reaction for these young people when they feel out of control of their bodies. So when their bodies do things that they don't necessarily have much understanding or control over, it tends to produce a lot of anxiety. We see this a lot with vomit phobia. The feeling of being sick and not being able to control or stop that. And there's potential for some of the developmental stages in puberty to produce the same response, and menstruation being one of them. So helping them to feel as normalized as possible in advance of it happening for the first time is really important, and making sure that they are fully aware of what's going on with their body and that it is a normal process. And even though they don't necessarily feel in control of it, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong happening or anything bad happening. So having that normalizing discussion ideally before they have their first period, so that they are prepared and can manage the kind of strength of emotion that happens when it does come, is really important, because otherwise there is a real tendency for them just to physiologically shut down and feel quite high levels of stress when this happens. It doesn't happen for every child, but we do see it in a sort of small population of children. So it's just something to be really, really mindful of. Sorry, Emily, thank you.
That's all right. So similarly, puberty comes with increased demands on hygiene. Showering, it might need to increase, and young people might, around the time of puberty, might want more independence with their kind of hygiene. So again, using social stories to explain how they can have their own independent showers or baths can be really helpful. The steps that are involved, like using shower gel, how much to use, washing their own hair, again, how much to use, how to know when it's rinsed out. All of those things are really important. And again, using those tips that James spoke up, any like reminders and timers, and just making it as scheduled and as structured as possible. And if there's any way that you can support by demonstrating and showing how much you would use in your hand for things like shower gel, just making it really concrete. And reward charts and things would be really helpful. Thank you. And also starting to use deodorant is something that kind of comes along with puberty. Again, deodorant can be very sensory, so there's sprays, there's creams, there's sticks, figuring out for them which works for them. And also it might be helpful to have like a specific number of swipes or sprays that they do, so they know exactly how much to use, exactly when to put it on in the morning. And so yeah, so it's just using the appropriate amount for them, so making it as concrete as possible as part of their routine.
This is one of the ones, particularly for boys, where dads are really important. Dads tend to, I'm a male, so I can say this, dads tend to shy away from these discussions a little bit. Really important that we try and, as best we can, if possible, have some gender congruence. So if it's a teenage boy going through puberty, the dad's there to show them what he does and can help them understand that this is normal. Everyone has to do it, and can show them how to do it, as well as provide visual instructions. The combination of the two is really important for making that concrete, because you've got to show them exactly what you need them to do, and then, as Emily said, giving them specific numbers to count to, so that they aren't relying on abstract thoughts about how long do I have to do it for. You make the time element of it really concrete. Jill, can you come off mute?
So in that I'm about to speak. I'm just wondering, we get a lot of families come to us saying that their young people just will not shower and they will not, change their clothes. Where do we go with that when there's just this absolute rigidity that they won't do these things?
Yeah, so it's really tricky. And what I'm going to say might sound quite counterintuitive, but I guess it depends completely on the child. Some children, and the ones that tend to cause a real problem with this stuff, are the more you pressure them and the more you push them, the less likely they are to want to do it. So there's a few different ways you can go with this, and what will work will depend on the child and how they respond. However, so one thing is to try and give them as much choice as you can. So choice around what they do in the shower, what areas of themselves they wash, when they wash, how long they wash for. Yeah, all of those things are really important. Some parents have had some, if there's a child who enjoys leaving the home, some parents have had some success with the social element, helping them understand the social boundaries or the social kind of faux pas around smelling, and encouraging them. So, for example, if they want them to have a shower, building in a social activity for a certain time in the week, and then helping them understand the kind of social nature around hygiene and cleanliness, so that before that social interaction comes, then they will shower. So that's another thing you can try. There's the other thing, I guess, is the sensory element of a shower versus a bath, and that how different young people experience that can be really different. If it is a sensory element and the feeling of the water drops in the shower is intolerable, and you tried all the different water pressures and shower heads and all that kind of good stuff, then it's just about being really creative with it, and maybe thinking about a wet wash with a wipe, having a bath if they'll do that. It's about being as flexible as possible, really. I guess the social kind of pressure would say shower every day. For some kids, that's just not going to be possible. And the more you push, the less likely they are to do it. So if you're at a situation where they're just flat out refusing, you've got no chance, you're asking them every day and they're not doing it, I would experiment with just completely backing off and not making it a demand at all. And because you're not going to, asking them isn't working and you're not going to get anywhere by doing that anyway. So you might as well have a go at just completely backing off and seeing what happens. For some kids that's worked, and you might get a shower every 7 to 10 days. For some kids it doesn't, and they're just not interested, or there may be a sensory reason that's underlying it. There isn't a particularly a holy grail for that one, unfortunately, but it is a big area, and I guess that in your forums and support groups, this is a really important thing to talk about, because so many children find that really hard, and there'll be a huge number of parents who have had more success and experience than I have of finding out what is effective for them.
Yeah, it comes up quite often, so it is something that different people share things on. So yeah, no, that's really useful, thank you. Oh, we've got something in the chat as well. Any suggestions around a child who enjoys the sensory aspect of the shower in such a way that it completely distracts them from actually focusing on the washing? I know this one too.
It's a great question. It's one of those good problems to have, I guess, isn't it? So I guess it depends to what extent you need them to wash and clean. So if they're in the bath and they're soaking, then that's a first win. In terms of, I guess if I'm understanding the question right, it's around use of shower gel and shampoo and that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're
and
having so much fun they forget to do those things.
Yeah. I would say, depends on the child. I would say if you got tasks that need to happen in the shower, or the bath, I would try and do those first. Once they get really excited and they're really enjoying it and they're kind of in their bubble doing their thing, you've probably got less wiggle room to get in there with the other stuff, or you can do it right at the end. But I would try and encourage you to allow them to have that fun time in the middle as a block. So either when they get bored at the end or before they've got really into it at the start. Obviously, if beforehand they're just really excited and they're not going to calm down, then you're not going to be able to do it at the start, are you? So before or end, and then try and make it into a game would be the other thing I would say. Try and make it part of the fun. Don't make it a boring part of the bath. Try and make it a fun part of the bath. Did you say that you've had experience of this, Jill, with?
Yeah, with many of my three. We put a visual list that we made waterproof, and we would put it in the shower saying these are things you need to do, and we would literally give a time frame, because he'll kill me saying this. My son, who is now an adult, would be in there for an hour and a half, and water costs money, and so we would put a list of this is how long it should take you to wash your hair. So get shampoo, a visual thing when he was younger, and then as he got older, just a list of instructions of things he had to remember to do and roughly how many seconds he could count to do it in. And that really helped. And after doing that for a few months, so we didn't need that anymore, and he still has very long showers, but he's okay, and he's fine now. But it was, he would get lost in the fun of just the sensory feel of it all.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's you making it concrete, isn't it? So that he remembers and has to apply those things. It's tricky because if they enjoy the sensory aspect of it, we want to give them as much positive experience as we can. So we don't want to make that an unpleasant experience, do we? So, and it's probably really helpful for regulation in other areas and coping with other stresses and things that happen in the day, right? So, it is a tricky one, but concrete instructions, visual task lists, that kind of thing.
Brilliant, thank you.
You can't go wrong. Wonderful. So another comment in the chat I've just noticed something.
That was just a thank you. So I think we are.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Next slide, Emily.
Yeah. Okay, for it. So similarly, hair growth. So explaining that it's really normal. Again, just preparing them in advance. Using charts to show how hair growth might appear. I guess explaining that it might be itchy and it might be uncomfortable, and just again really normalizing that experience, talking through it in advance. I think with the gender congruence, if you can demonstrate any hair growth, that's going to be really helpful at home as well. But just something to kind of prepare them for. And then if you
it just reminded me of an 11-year-old who came in the other week who had the start of sort of facial hair on his moustache, and when he saw my beard he was really excited because he didn't have many experience seeing other men with beards, and he didn't like how his looked or felt, but then he saw mine, he was really happy with it. Just having those conversations are really important. He also wanted to see my shoulder blades because he had shoulder blades and he didn't know that everyone else had shoulder blades. So just good things to be aware of and talk about with your children.
And following on from the beard, shaving. So shaving, I would consider, if this is something you want to discuss or not, start with the fact that it's a completely personal choice if you want to adjust shaving. But if they do choose to shave, it can be very sensory. So trying different razors, different shaving creams, just getting used to the water on their face to begin with, kind of really breaking it down step by step. And it might need to be that you have to start with, that's right, like kind of gradual steps on different areas of skin. So just putting even shaving cream on the back of the hand and just getting used to how that feels and how washing that off feels, because shaving cream can be quite sticky sometimes. And if there is someone at home who can demonstrate shaving for them, to talk them through it so they can watch that, or videos they can watch that as well, that would be really helpful. But I would consider, if that's something that they really are reluctant to do, is that okay as well? Because we don't, as James proves, we don't all need to shave.
I guess the other thing to say is if the shaving cream or the soap is really from a sensory perspective it's just too much, then just go for a wet shave, buy a very slightly more expensive razor, and you should be okay. If you go for the cheap razor, then you might end up with loads of cuts. But yeah, if that is a big barrier, then it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, my son uses an electric razor. He can't cope with shaving at all, and that just does it enough. It's not brilliant, but it's enough that he's happy with it. So yeah, absolutely.
Completely, yeah. As Emily said, it's a completely personal choice, isn't it? So whatever they're comfortable with. Cool. Okay, any questions on anything puberty related before we delve into the big topic of sexual relationships?
No, I don't think so. I haven't had anything else come up in the chat. And I think in terms of shaving, you apply the same principles for girls as well, about whether or not they want to, the sex we feel and do. It's, very similar. There's lots of overlaps, isn't there?
Absolutely.
If I could ask a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not sure if this is a situation you've had. So my son is autistic, but he also he has septal dysplasia. His pituitary gland doesn't work, and he's aware of this, that he's not going to actually go into puberty until we start giving him testosterone. We have to replace a lot of his hormones, just because the pituitary gland doesn't work. And I think that this may be causing him anxiety about knowing, because he's learning about puberty in school, and it's different. I'm just wondering if this is anything you guys have ever encountered, because I think that when it comes to that, when we start giving that, I think he sounds like he's quite afraid of this, that all these changes are going to happen. It's not going to be natural, and it's different for him because it's not like it's just going to happen. It's going to be something that, no, we are now starting, and here's your medication to do it.
Yeah.
If you have any thoughts on that, I'm not sure. I mean, this is probably an unusual situation, but I'm just saying if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I've come across myself. I guess I'm just thinking, for the perspective of your child, it is probably a very scary, unknown process. And I guess it's about kind of filling in a load of those, as much of those blanks as you can, probably while also understanding that you won't be able to answer every worry or every question they have about it. And to some extent, it will be about experiencing it. But my instinct would be to go down a kind of social story route and just as much education as you can to kind of fill in the blanks around what his mind may be imagining might happen or not knowing might happen. We tend to fill blanks with fears. So as much education as you possibly can about what he can try and expect, and as much help from the medical professionals involved as to kind of the pace of things, what he might see first, how it might go, the trajectory of the pubertal development would be my instincts. What would be most helpful. I don't know if Emily or Jill have any other ideas or thoughts.
No, I think that sounds, just kind of preparing him and giving him as much advanced notice and kind of making it aware of him, and I guess also validating that it is different for him and that it's anxiety provoking and that's okay for him as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I would, for my own children, they've all been very nervous of going through puberty and not wanted it to happen, and been very frightened of that change, even talking about it, years before. So I think it is that education, social stories that you can write yourselves and kind of tailor to exactly his needs. If you can find any little YouTube videos with information about puberty, just not enough to overwhelm him, but, and there's some great books as well out there, just that you can have around and talk to at his pace. Just back up what James and Emily said. I think that's probably the best way.
Yeah, I mean, because this is an area that so many children struggle with, there are so many resources out there. So particularly social stories, if you've not come across social stories before, there's lots of them online that are pre-written, and you can just kind of download them and play around with them a little bit and make them a little bit more specific for your young person. But there should be plenty of stuff online to kind of get you going. And then I would just liaise as much as you can with the people that are overseeing the treatment and have the clinical oversight over the process, to try and just gain as much awareness, as much understanding, as much kind of factual understanding, I guess, as to what's going to happen for him. And then a lot of it's about validating, because it is an anxiety provoking process, and anyone going through puberty in that kind of managed way will probably feel a certain level of anxiety. So that's very normal, I think.
And it might be, we use a lot with our kids, coping and resilience plans. So it might be that we've got some online, and we sort of talk about it at groups and on our courses. But it might be planning for, okay, if this happens, what does he want you to do? How are you going to react? Just preparing him for, if he's not happy or if something happens that he's, struggling with, that there's a plan already in place of what you're going to do and what he needs you to do. So I can easily send you some information across for that if you email info@, and then that might just be helpful as well.
Lovely.
Okay. Got in the chat as well, asking if there are any book recommendations. Obviously, we've got lots of books in our library that have been recommended, but yeah, James and Emily, is there any that you know of that are particularly good around puberty?
So my experience with books and resources has been that I have said to people before, this book's quite good, and they come back to me and said it's rubbish, and some people said it's really good. So it's very specific for your situation. So I'm not going to recommend any specific books today. I would, 'cause it also depends on ages. It's important to get that age specificity right, and their learning level as well. So it's very hard to take a book and match it to a child. It's better to go the other way around, which I realize is not very helpful. The thing that I think is actually really good at the moment is YouTube, and I'm going to say it, TikTok. There's a lot of rubbish on there, but if you spend the time just going through them, there's a lot of educational resources on those platforms now. And yeah, it's just about books, videos, all these things. It's just about trying to identify what you think is going to reach your child most effectively and be the best educator for them. The reason I say TikTok and YouTube is because so many of these kids now just prefer videos. Well, that's an easier platform for them to consume information and learn from. And lots of them do lots of learning through videos at school. So yeah, I would just spend some time having a look on there, avoiding all the rubbish and trying to find one that you think will resonate. But no, I can't give a specific recommendation, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. Fab. Are there any other questions in the chat, Jill, or
No, we're all good, thank you.
Move on to sexual relationships. Okay, so this is obviously a big topic, and we have broken it down into several different categories, I guess. So we're going to talk about masturbation, we're going to talk about pornography and nudes, but we're first going to start with the very intricate and complex nature of sexual relationships between teenagers and adults. So I guess the main message here is to say that we are all completely wired and predisposed to become curious about sexual relationships as we develop in puberty. So as our chronological age hits that kind of 13, 14, 15, 16, we start to develop a very strong curiosity about sex, about sexual relationships, about sexual pleasure. So in the same way with puberty, this curiosity can often develop ahead of a child's social awareness, social understanding, social skills, understanding of nuance and boundaries. So you get this kind of mismatch where they really want to have, or they're interested in sexual relationships and understanding their own sexuality. However, they may lack the social skills or the social understanding to go about that in a way that's comfortable for both parties, or it may feel very anxiety provoking or confusing. So in the same with any other life skill or area, this is just something that we have to teach. It can be very difficult to teach because it involves a lot of abstract concepts, and there's an inherent, I guess, trial and error element to some of this, which we'll just go through in a moment. But I guess that the thing that I always find interesting about this is that all the research, all the evidence suggests that children with neurodiversity receive less sex education than their peers, which is a bit worrying, because they should receive at least the same amount of sex education as their peers and not be discriminated against in that sense. But I would say that for a lot of these children, this is an area of concern and anxiety, so they probably need a lot more and a bit more thought going into how that's taught. What we want to cultivate, I guess, is and so again, this is another theme that will come up through this chapter, but we want to cultivate a really open and honest relationship and a kind of taboo-free conversation around sexual relationships, sexual curiosity and urges between parent and child, and that may feel slightly uncomfortable at times, but sharing and talking these things through is so much more helpful than trying to navigate them alone. So that's kind of where we want to get to, and it's only through those conversations and through them bringing their specific worries and anxieties that they'll be able to learn what the right and wrong things and what mistakes to avoid. So I've got a video here. We thought it was important to try and include as much the voice of people who lived experience of neurodiversity and autism as we could. So this is a chap called Lauren Snow, who some of you may have be aware of. He does a lot of work on YouTube. He does lots of talks for NHS services across the country and other organisations. He's quite an interesting bloke. He's got a lot of videos, or he's got a few videos on his channel about puberty and sexual development. So it's quite interesting to listen to. So I'm just going to play a very quick clip. He's going to talk a bit about the kind of nature of our society and how children will pick up on this stuff. So even though we might think that they're not aware of sexual relationships, there will be some level of exposure, and it will be something that's on their mind. And how that was kind of, I guess, his experience of living with autism and that being kind of discussed around him, but not maybe understanding what was going on. So I'm going to press play and let it run for a few seconds. I'm going to pause it. I'm going to wait for Jill or Emily to give me a thumbs up that you can hear it, and then I'll relax.
You wouldn't consider this, but...
All good? Yes, fantastic. Right. Go back to the start.
But when it comes to sex and how it works, and also sexuality and what it means to be attracted to each other, you start at a younger age. Because if you talking about relationships to an older child, they may naturally understand more the way these things are. But a child may see things differently and not understand this. So they need to ask more questions. They need more time to understand. They need more time to observe. Yeah, it's like when I was in France, all these children, there's 6-year-olds and there's 15-year-olds, and there's about 20 of them around me. And the older ones are talking about sex. The younger children are listening. The younger children are doing that vacant look in their face as if they don't understand, but you can tell that they understand to a level. So children are exposed to these things at a very young age, a lot younger than parents want to admit or accept. And if you don't explain to them, then they're going to get these snippets of information, misinformation, completely get things wrong, and as a result have potential problems, especially even more if they're autistic. And unfortunately, if they get things wrong, they could be consent violations and be potentially quite serious. When I talk about sex, I'm not just talking about sex, I'm talking about sexuality, I'm talking about relationships, I'm talking about consent, I'm talking all those things. And on the basic levels, that starts off at a very young age. A child can't consent to things. Okay, they have to go to school, they have to go shopping, but you can teach them, even though their consent is going to be overridden, that they can maybe speak up. And that is very simply by, even if they have to do the thing, it's asking what, about their emotions. It's listening when they voice their concerns. It means that they're not bad for speaking up. So that means that when they come into adulthood, that even though they may be in situations they don't want to be in, they're more likely to speak up. They're more likely to communicate, I want to do something different, I don't want to do this, or this is my thoughts. So that's, that needs to start at a very, very young age, because these are children that, because their emotions are different, because their perception is different, they are going to be dismissed more. Other people are not going to listen. Their consent is going to be overridden a lot more than everybody else. And so naturally, they're going to have more difficulty with speaking up, with communicating their needs, and actually respecting other people's boundaries, because theirs is being walked over.
So what I like about what he talks about there is the idea of consent and that children's experience of consent. And although I guess as adults we see that as an important part of our life, is to encourage your child to do things that are hang on, I'll come out of presenter mode, to do things that are functional and important for them, like going to school, which they may not want to do. We have to encourage them to do it anyway. However, from their perspective, their perception of that may be that I'm being asked to do things that I don't want to do, and their perception of consent, or their autonomy, or their voice and what they're allowed to talk about and speak up against, may be over time a bit downtrodden. So it's really important that we help them, or give them the space to practice sharing their voice, talking about what they think they want from their body, from their perception, and articulating for themselves what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. Those are important skills that we all have to develop through life. And in this context, they're especially important to help young people kind of cultivate and develop. So I would say he's someone that's worth having a look at his YouTube channel. He's got, like I say, he's got a few videos. I think we might do another one later on. But he's an interesting chap. Okay, so I'm going to start off by just going over some things that we need to teach that are quite often things that we might forget about or miss. So unfortunately, the research shows that teens with neurodiversity and or a learning disability are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior. So that may include misunderstanding consent, public sexual activity, not using protection, being targeted for sexual encounters because of a perceived social vulnerability. And unfortunately, autistic individuals in particular are 2.5 times more likely to experience sexual coercion than peers without autism. So that issue of consent, which we'll come across, Emily will talk about in a little while in more detail, is really important. I guess from our perspective, this is about education. This is about trying to help them understand what they are able to say, what they're not able to say, how they say no, how they kind of push back against this, and how they understand the social dynamics that might lead to a safe sexual relationship versus a sexual relationship that's unsafe. And in a minute I'll talk about trust and things, but making that process probably a bit clunky but as concrete as possible is so important, because if you rely on saying things like you have to wait until you trust someone, you have to wait until you feel comfortable with them, these are all really difficult abstract things that I can understand and others might be able to understand, but from their perspective that can be really difficult to put their finger on and know how they're feeling, and they may get that wrong. So we have to be really clear in how we talk about these things and how we develop safe sexual relationships. And yeah, that might feel a bit clunky for them, but it's safe, and that's the most important thing. So just more than anything else, there's something to be aware of, the kind of the risks and the evidence, I guess, around sexual relationships for children with neurodiversity. So this is really important. So teens with neurodiversity often have poor understanding of time and age. Time and age are abstract concepts. If you say to your child with autism, I'll be 5 minutes, I'll be 30 seconds, it probably means nothing to them. They want it now. They don't understand how long 30 seconds is. It's the same way if you ask them to recall a memory, how long ago it was, a month, 6 months, a year, they quite often get that very wrong. They will say it was 3 years ago, and you'll go, it was 2 weeks ago, mate. So we also see it with friendships a lot when we talk to people about their friendships. Again, particularly with autism, they'll say, yeah, so-and-so, Johnny's my best friend. He's my best friend. I've known him ages. When did you meet him? Last week. So their understanding of these things is slightly, or can be anyway, their perception can be slightly off. So in terms of sexual relationships, that's so important, because you have to give them explicit age ranges for people for whom it's appropriate for them to have a sexual relationship, and want that probably to be as narrow as possible. If you allow them to pursue an interest or a friendship or a relationship with someone who is much younger but maybe more at their socially developed age, that might be great for other relationships, but if they're having, I guess, thoughts and feelings around sexual curiosity and the other person's much younger and they aren't, it's about safeguarding them as well and helping your child understand that's inappropriate. Equally, if they're a bit younger, but all their friends are older, and they're possibly thinking and talking about sexual relationships, but they're only 12, 13, helping them understand what conversations are appropriate, talk about what they might be hearing, any concerns, any confusions, and helping them know that although the older children may be engaging or talking about this kind of stuff, what feels safe for them to do. So we have to be really clear about time and age, and I think the next slide we'll go into a bit more, but making that as again concrete, clear, direct as possible is just really important. I kind of covered the second bullet point there, and I guess yeah, we've gone through all of that, haven't we, without even realizing? That's fine. Okay, so a very difficult concept to try and teach someone is, how do you build a sexual relationship that has the key ingredients of a safe and appropriate sexual relationship, when all those ingredients and those concepts are really abstract. So I've talked about trust. How do you know when you trust someone? It's really difficult to pinpoint that. There may be some people that you trust with some activities in some spaces, but not with others. You may trust someone when your parents are around, but when your parents aren't there, you trust them less. It's a very subtle kind of, yeah, again, abstract concept, and children will find that really hard to kind of pick up on, identify whether they have neurodiversity or not. It's very difficult. So we probably want to pull them away from relying on feelings or internal feelings like trust, or talking to them about things like trust. We want to give them concrete ways that they know that they've trusted someone. So that might be my parents have met them. That might be I've known them for X amount of time. That might mean that we've already had a conversation about sex before, and I've had that conversation with my parents or someone else, and they agree that it's appropriate. It might be about how you've met them. Are they someone that you know online? Are they someone that you've met through school? So all of these different considerations need to be brought into it. They all feed into our sense of trust. I'm much more likely to trust someone that I go to school with and that I've known for 5 years than someone who's online who I've never met before. But for a child with autism, that might feel wrong because they've spoken to the person online much more than they've spoken to the person at school. So you have to have these conversations with them, and you have to make it as explicit as you possibly can. In a few slides time, there's one of the things that's going to be quite helpful is a decision-making tree and a flow chart. So they can kind of do the thinking for themselves, and you can put things on there like, how long have I known them for? Do my parents know them? How have I talked to my parents about this? To help them kind of go down that decision-making process. I think same with puberty, really. You can't do this too early, probably. So as Lauren said in the video, kids will be exposed to this earlier than we think. So as they're starting to hit puberty, 11, 12, 13, not talking about necessarily sexual relationships, but talking about relationships, boyfriends, girlfriends, their thoughts on these things is really important. And I guess their perception or their understanding of consent, just starting off with things like being touched. So if a teacher puts a hand on their shoulder in the classroom, how does that feel? Are they comfortable with that? They're not comfortable with that. How might they let someone know that they're not comfortable with that if that is the case? So just starting to have those conversations, as Lauren said, giving them a kind of voice around saying what they are happy with, what they're not happy with, what they like from a relationship, what they don't like from a relationship, any questions or exposure that they might have had to sexual conversations from peers, cultivating that really open, honest discussion and relationship with your child, so that when these things inevitably do come up for them and they start wondering about them, or they start having thoughts around developing a more intimate relationship with someone, then that relationship's already there and they feel comfortable to share with you. I guess again, we'll come on to this in sort of the nudes section of the talk, but children tend to, all the evidence suggests that children overestimate the extent to which their peers are sexually active. So most lads, unfortunately, will walk around and brag about how many conquests they've had, how many people they've had sex with or whatever. And children then start to develop a very warped sense that everyone else is doing this stuff and everyone else is involved in relationships, but I'm not. And therefore I need to, in order to be worth something or to be good enough, I have to go and pursue this for myself, or else I'm not likable or not lovable or whatever it may be. But it's all a kind of myth. It's all a social pressure that's kind of out there. And the reality is that particularly more and more, children are having sex later and later, the research suggests. So I guess having those open discussions with your child, creating that relationship where you can do that is really important, and just not shying away from it. I'm saying this with the understanding that lots of kids aren't just going to come home from school and voluntarily say, oh, I heard this today, I did that today. So when I say cultivating that relationship, I'm not necessarily just meaning sitting down one-to-one and having a conversation that they might find really socially intense. It's about creating the resources and the space for them to explore that on their own terms, and then you're kind of there alongside them as a support if they need it. So again, that might be a YouTube videos, that might be social stories, that might be books, that might be trying to identify films, TV programs which feature sexual relationships, and then that you can watch alongside them and you can just ask questions as it goes through, or give them a space to ask questions. It might be, YouTube videos, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. Reality TV can be quite good for teaching about relationships if they're into that kind of thing. Love Island's really good for it, if it's age appropriate, and you can tolerate watching Love Island. So yeah, it's about being creative as you can to try and find ways to open those discussions up. The thing that I'm less aware of, but I know does happen and is a particular interest, is anime. Involves a lot of discussions around relationships and conversations around that. So as best you can, asking your child about their anime and their characters and what ones they're watching, and cartoons and video games, and then just trying to pull out any kind of relationship concepts that are coming up for them, what they might want to talk about. So it's on their interests, but you're discussing the concept of relationships with them. That can be helpful as well. Jill, you came off mute, so I'm going to give you a minute if you wanted to ask a question or anything.
Yeah, I was just thinking, for us, so my youngest daughter would rather do anything than talk to me about this, and that's fine. And we have other things in place, but she also will talk to her older sister or her older cousin. And so I think for me, it would be about sort of briefing them a little bit on this and making sure they're aware of these things, so that if they don't come to me, then I know somebody else can have that conversation and kind of be ready for it. And also with my youngest, we're best off if we text conversations, that works better for her, or if we have a conversation in the car when I don't have to look at her and she doesn't have to look at me. So those kind of things for us. But this is a really useful list, I think, in terms of, for me, giving it to other people, almost knowing it myself and being there if she wants to have that conversation, but helping other people understand some of the things that she might need some support with.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. Thank you. Cool. Right. I think I'm handing over to you here, Emily. Emma.
Yeah, so just some facts about consent, really. So consent is, the age of consent in the UK is 16, just like from a legal perspective, and consent is essential to healthy, respectful, safe and enjoyable sexual experiences. So as James has already kind of reiterated, it's really important that they learn how to give and get consent. So one way it's helpful to provide rules about what's okay and what isn't okay, so just making it as concrete as possible, and using photos, animations or watching TV to explain the social cues, to kind of point out how people may look when they feel happy or interested, or how they might look when they feel uncomfortable or unhappy. There's slightly more vague emotions that aren't always as clear, but watching kind of video clips and things and talking through that might help give some visual clues as well. Do we want to play the video?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Right, stop share. Oops. Always takes just slightly too long, this stuff. Right, it should be loading now. Share screen. Oh, I didn't do sound. I didn't do share sound. Let's try that again. Right, that's better.
Smashing tool for employee engagement. Say hi to Bob, the modern HR.
We all know
Did I just play it? Yep.
Consent is super important, and consent isn't just about sex. It's a part of everything we do and every choice we make. But from childhood, we're sent mixed messages about it. Today, we're going to talk about why teaching consent is even more important for autistic people. Hi, it's Law from Autism Academy. When we talk about consent, we often think about other people and their bodies, about sex and touch. But consent is also about making choices about what we want to do. When we're children, our desires are often overridden. We don't have much autonomy. We have to do things our parents say, like when to eat, going to school, and bed, even if we don't want to. As we grow older, we have much more control over our choices and to express our desires. But if you're autistic, society can see your emotions as odd, and you can receive constant messages that you're acting unreasonably or over the top, your emotions invalidated, your opinions and desires dismissed. And if you're constantly sent these messages from a young age, you may be less inclined to speak your desires or say no. You may feel forced to agree, or you may have stopped trying to tell others altogether. And having your feelings constantly invalidated and dismissed can also erode a person's self-esteem. This isn't a problem exclusive to autistic people. Many countries lack comprehensive sex and relationship education, but there are things you can do to help. Whether an adult or a child, you should ask them what they want to do and listen to how they feel and their desires. Even if they're a child and still have to do the thing, this shows them that their feelings are important and valid, and can encourage them to express their desires into adulthood. I recommend checking out these videos. We all know consent is
Oops. So that was, oh, I can't move my screen. I'm stuck. There we go. So that's Lauren again. One of his animations. So yeah, as I say, would definitely recommend having a look at his stuff. Right. That. This. Boom. There we go.
Next one, please. Thank you. So the example of like rules to consider it's explaining that it's okay to have sex if you want to, and you feel happy and safe, and the other person wants to and feels happy and safe. If you're old enough and the other person is old enough, and like James said, you might want to add in specific rules around the age range, depending on your child's age range. Say no to sexual activity if you're not ready, don't feel safe or comfortable, or don't have contraception. Say yes to one sexual activity and no to another activity, and change your mind at any stage of sex. This is really important to clarify that consent is a continual process. It's not you don't just give consent and then that's it. They can take it away at any point. Consenting to a kiss does not mean you've consented to have sex. And it's not okay to pressure, beg, or guilt another person into having sex if they don't want to. Pay or give gifts to another person to get them to have sex with you. Assume someone has given consent. You need to ask. Assume things are a sign of consent. For example, if you're in another person's bedroom, or they send a sexual text message, or they touch you. Have sex with someone like a teacher, a sports coach, or a health professional. Have sex with family members, or have sex in a public place. So breaking down all those things that you may kind of think are implied that you wouldn't have sex with a family member, but making it really explicit for them. There's very clear boundaries and clear rules. Things like how to ask for consent, it might be helpful to write a script for them, something that they can learn so they know how to ask, and also teach like the different ways someone could say no, or that, so it's not just saying no, it could be stop, like explaining those kind of more subtle ways that people might change their mind halfway through, and how to be aware of that. But breaking it down into really kind of concrete rules for them to be aware of will help take away some of that ambiguity.
Yeah, and just sorry, I'm just going to say on that point, when we're thinking about it's not okay to pressure or beg or sort of coerce someone into having sex if they don't want to. Again, that's an abstract concept. How do they know if they're being pressurizing or not? Some children, again, particularly with autism, will struggle to see their role in relationships. So they might find it really hard to identify if they're putting pressure on someone or they're begging someone to, again, clear rules. If you've had the conversation with them before, you can ask them once. If they say no, then you do not ask them again. So that there's a number attached to it. It's concrete, and there's very clear rules around what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
So yeah, here just an example, sorry to explain, for asking for consent. So I want to kiss my partner, I always need to ask them if it's okay first. This is called asking for consent. Consent is making sure my partner wants me to kiss them. Asking for consent means I respect my partner. I will ask, can I kiss you please? I will wait for the answer. If my partner says yes, I can kiss them. If my partner says no, I can't kiss them. We can talk instead. So again, just really breaking it down, what it means, why they're asking, and they do it every time. I think that's really important to make sure that it's not just because someone's given consent once, they can change their mind each time, and how they can feel about being asked as well. So the reverse. So I can give consent if I feel happy and safe, and it might be helpful to explain to them how they know if they want to or not, and again break that down for their particular specific way of identifying that. I can say yes if I want my partner to kiss me. I can say no if I don't want my partner to kiss me. If I say yes now, I can say no later if I change my mind. If my partner tries to kiss me when I say no, I should say stop. If my partner doesn't stop, I should get help from another adult, and just make it really clear what they can do. And these kind of guidelines, like I say, there are things that will probably need to become more concrete, that you use that and you work with your young person to make it fit with what their level of understanding is and what's going to be appropriate for them. Cool. So in terms of like consent and safe sex and contraception, so boys need to be taught about condoms, where to buy them, how much they cost, how to use them, and they may also need to be taught clearly about what would happen if they didn't use them. Again, using as many visual aids as possible and how to use them, telling them about kind of sell-by dates and things like that. It's probably going to be helpful as well. Just all those things that you might think are implied, just breaking it down, making it as concrete as possible. With girls, often contraception we need to talk about in advance. They'll probably need to go to a GP or a sexual health nurse. It's not something they can just go and buy in a pharmacy in the same way. And it's likely that you as a parent is going to have to initiate that interaction. So again, creating that open space where it's not shameful, it's not punitive, and they are given the choice to think about what they might want and thinking about their needs. So if they are unable to swallow pills, it might be another option is for them. If you're not sure how hormonally they're going to cope, something that doesn't stay in their body for 6 months might be preferable. And it's thinking about all those things with them and having the time and space to think about it, and being aware that female contraception does not work immediately. So if they're coming to you kind of the weekend before they want to have sex for the first time, explaining that really clearly to them as well. And in terms of sexual health, so plan for them in advance what to do if unprotected sex occurs. Let them know that it's okay to kind of talk to you or another safe person, or where they can go. And you can help them access sexual health resources if they need to have an STI test, for example, or they need to kind of have emergency contraception, letting them know in advance that it's not something that to be embarrassed about, it's not something that they kind of need to worry about, that you can help them, and they just need to kind of come and talk to you if they have a use protection, and then kind of supporting them with that decision making going forward for them. But again, it'll be easier to talk about it prior and having that open conversation as early as possible, so they know kind of the consequences and what that can look like.
And that's also something that should be taught in secondary schools. So I guess it's about liaising with your school, being aware when those lessons are coming up and they're doing PSHE time on it, and then you can just follow in and ask if they've got any questions after they've had that teaching at school. So you can strike on those moments as well.
So this is the kind of yes/no diagram that James was talking about to help them really concrete make decisions about consent. So going through a kind of a flow chart like this, with the clear boundaries, have I known them for more than 6 months? Are they my boyfriend and girlfriend? And kind of going through those kind of yes or no options for them, again, for what's appropriate for them, to help them make that decision and help them kind of understand if they want to, and having that kind of area of like, if they need help, saying no, how to talk about that, coming back to you and you supporting them with that conversation, but making it as concrete as possible for them. Using diagrams like this can be really helpful.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is only the start of a diagram. Those are not the only 3 things that you should be considering. I couldn't fit the whole thing on one page. And I guess these are quite useful because they don't involve the child having to come and talk to the parent about it. So they can have this independently, same as the kind of washing instructions in the shower, and they can go through it themselves. Depending on how their mind works, their level of learning, you can have a flow chart like this. If this is a bit overwhelming for them, you can make it into a book. So they only got to read one instruction at a time. And it says, if yes, turn the page. If no, don't have sex with them. I'll talk to your parents about it. So different formats, different ways that you can adapt this depending on what your child will process better. But it's just a good thing to prepare for, I guess, so that you've got it in the locker and then they can use it independently if they need to, and then come to you if they need any extra help. It's also a good way of making the decision-making process nice and concrete for them. Wonderful. Okay. Any questions at all? Anything in the chat, Jill?
No, all good so far, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, right. In that case, we'll press on. So should we talk a bit about masturbation, which can be extremely confusing, and is where sexual development and puberty kind of cross over. So I guess to start with, it's just about really normalizing and validating that masturbation is a normal part of development. I guess the other thing that I want to say before we go into any further on this topic is that there are different family values, and people in different households will have their own beliefs and perspectives around appropriate masturbation and what's not. So we're going to talk very generally about it, but I think that's a really important caveat that everyone will implement rules and guidance and boundaries based around their own values, and that's fine. We're just going to talk about it in a general sense. So masturbation, normal part of development. It can fulfill many different functions just besides sexual pleasure. So it can help people to relax. It can give children some assistance with sleep. It's actually very effective in regulating emotions, stress, anxiety, depression, anger, that kind of thing. And some children will get a sort of sensory benefit from it as well, particularly those that are seeking approprioceptive, interoceptive, or touch. So it's not necessarily always sexual, and there's lots of different reasons why someone may masturbate. So that's important to be aware of. Not going to the next page. There we go. So just thinking a bit about changes with the penis. So erections can be very confusing, particularly the first time that it happens. And children can often be left with lots of blank space and sort of wondering about why they've got an erection or where that's come from or what their body's telling them. again, it's similar to sort of the discussion we had around menstruation and vomiting. When a child feels out of control of their body, for some children, that can feel really upsetting. So it's just really important to have this conversation before they have their first erection, so that they, or kind of provide them with some learning and some education before they have their first erection, so that they can be sort of prepared and aware of what it means, and that it's nothing to worry about. So you can get erections for many reasons. So obviously you can have an erection because of sexual stimulation. It can also just be general excitement, and overstimulation will sometimes cause children to have an erection. If you need to go to the toilet and you're asleep, you can develop an erection at night and wake up with an erection in the morning. Doesn't mean that you're sexually aroused, it just means that you need to go to the toilet. So helping the child to understand those different functions of erections is really important. And as I say, you kind of want to get this in there slightly before puberty. And social stories for masturbation tend to be the best, or certainly the first port of call, I would say, explaining some of these concepts through a social story. So the research and all the guidance on the NSPCC websites will say that masturbation should only be seen as a problem if it occurs in public, causes self-injury, or interferes with everyday life, and that's probably the service where we would fall down on it as well. So it's important to teach about it clearly. It's a normal part of development. We would say that most children will engage in it at some point in their teenage years, and as long as it's done privately and safely, and it isn't interfering on their sort of day-to-day functioning, then it's being done normally and appropriately. There are various different traffic light systems that you can find on the NSPCC Safe Sex website, which will provide a link for you to be able to disseminate maybe after the talk. But it just gives you some sort of guidance around what is appropriate masturbation and sexual development and what isn't. And it's helpful just to reassure any concerns or worries that you might have around the child's behavior. Cool. Okay, so excuse me. So I guess accurate and direct language in this case is really important. So we want to try and use clear terminology. It can be very tempting to use pseudonyms, but we want to use the biologically and anatomically correct language, at least in the first instance. And then if the child expresses a preference for different pseudonyms and there's a shared understanding of what you're talking about, then that's okay. But in the first instance, definitely try and be as clear and direct and accurate as you can. When we use the word masturbation, it's also really important to make sure the child understands what that word means, because lots of children there have certainly been plenty of examples of children getting confused between, is masturbation just touching your penis? So if someone scratches their groin, are they masturbating? Or is there something different going on to it? And explaining kind of the sexual function behind masturbation, I guess, as a starting point. There have been quite a few instances in schools across Hampshire and Southampton where children have reported that someone was masturbating and they were scratching their groin. So making that extremely clear and ensuring that you've got a sort of shared definition of that is really important from the outset. And again, same with sexual relationships. We know that most teens don't want to talk about this at all. So as Jill said, finding other significant others in their life that may be able to have that conversation with them more easily, or providing resources, videos that they may find more helpful is also a good shout, and again, good to do before, or slightly before you think that this is going to become up for them as an idea.
We do have some books on this in our library as well. A couple of boys, one for girls, nice and fairly Beautiful. Basic ones, but might be helpful.
Fantastic, thanks, Jill. So yeah, also important to remember that teaching what to do afterwards, how to clean up after themselves, because we don't want that left lying around. And I guess the other thing to say is, again, where time is a difficult concept for some of these children, and they will have unwanted erections at times. That will happen. So they just need to be aware that this will end. So the first concern is that a child will develop an unwanted erection and then they'll be like, this is never going to go away because of their poor understanding of time. So helping them understand that they will pass, but you may have to clearly teach them to seek privacy while this happens and how to seek privacy while this happens. In those moments when you have an unwanted erection, for some children, that can be a really anxiety-provoking experience. And then the kind of thinking and the logic, what do I do about this, kind of goes out the window, and it becomes sort of a panic. So helping them to just in advance prepare what to do, how to manage that situation is really important. And like, as I've said already, yeah, social stories, videos, books. Jill's got the books in the library. Dedicate some time into exploring those resources and thinking what might be helpful for your child. Pornography and nudes, the scourge of the last 15 years. So the research actually indicates that neurodiverse teens are less likely to watch pornography than their peers, and the age of onset tends to be a bit higher. So 18.7 was the stated figure. So quite a large sample of teenagers they did that with. So that's one thing, I guess. As I say, it's completely up to individual families to make decisions around what they are comfortable with their children accessing. I guess what we would say is that most teenagers, particularly if we think about ADHD and impulse control and executive functioning, most children are likely to seek this content out as their sexual curiosity develops as they get older. So in any event, teaching about safe internet use and how to do these things safely and appropriately is extremely important. So I think an explicit education around pornography is missing from a large aspect of our PSHE curricula in this country, and it's a really important topic to make sure children are comfortable with and aware of. There's lots of things to talk about, but I guess some of the more important ones are that they are actors. If you're watching pornography, you are watching actors. That is not a real depiction of sexual intimacy. Particularly children who have poor social understanding, there's a risk that they might kind of rote learn, or I can't think of a better way of saying rote learn, but just see a sexual interaction on a pornographic video and then try and replicate that inside, because that's what they've seen on their video. So that's what you do. And making that really clear that you're watching a dramatization, an actor like a TV program, is really important. If your teenager is accessing pornography, direct them to safe sites can be really helpful. So this may feel really uncomfortable, but if it's going to happen anyway, and you know your child is interested in and has a curiosity around pornography, then taking some kind of control over that and helping them find the safe sites is really important. If you're comfortable with this. Otherwise, the internet's a horrible place, and there's lots of other more dangerous sites that they might find themselves on. As I say, be aware that there is this kind of social pressure and narrative out there around sending explicit images of themselves. Again, this is another thing that children overestimate how much this is going on. So that creates a sense of pressure. I need to do it to fit in, to not be different. All the research indicates that it's not actually as bad as, or not actually as prevalent as teenagers think. Unfortunately, it is happening quite a lot. Snapchat is an absolute evil in this regard, unfortunately. So I guess, again, it's about being open with them. It's about having open conversations if you can, or finding members of close relationships that they can have these conversations with. But I guess validating the pressure, but making it clear the risks that come with sending a picture, and helping them understand that just because you send a picture on Snapchat and you think it disappears after 10 seconds does not mean that that picture disappears. There are all too many examples of those pictures being saved, screenshotted, photos taken and distributed online, and once it's out there, it's out there. So they need to know that if they're sending a picture to one person, they're basically sending it to the whole world. That's how you kind of want them to see it. And making those risks as concrete and clear as possible. And again, you can use decision-making tools, you can use social stories, you can use cards, you can use all sorts as almost like visual instructions for how they might go about that. If you're concerned around what your child may be using, particularly Snapchat for, then and on the younger end of the spectrum, a discussion around how monitoring that access might be important. Unfortunately, the social pressure to send nudes or explicit images of yourself starts quite early. Even if they're not actually happening, the pressure is there. So if you're worried about your child's vulnerability to that social pressure, having those conversations early and some safe monitoring of the high-risk apps like Snapchat might make you feel more comfortable as a parent. It might be a good way to go. Cool. Okay. Any questions about masturbation, pornography, explicit images before we move on?
Nothing coming up in the chat so far. I was just gonna say that was really useful. Sort of really good step-by-step advice. I know with one of my children, I won't say who, but we had to be really clear around pornography about what was legal and what wasn't, because we didn't know what he was accessing. But we said, you know, there are some things online that you could stumble across, and that would end up with the police knocking on the door. And we talked through what that was, and you know, the implications of that, and you know, and to avoid that at all costs. And he, because we were very black and white about it, he understood that, and that really helped, I think, just to guide, you know, what he was accessing. But I really like the idea of actually having that conversation around some safe websites as well, because, you know, it's going to happen. And if we can help, you know, in that sense, to keep them safe from themselves, I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Comment in the chat is just that, you know, this is really helpful. It's been really, really helpful. And thank you.
Good. I guess the other thing to say is that when you're accessing pornography or sexually explicit content on the internet, there will be a ton of pop-ups that come up, and it will be, this girl wants to talk to you, this person wants to talk to you. So making them aware that there's no one on the other end of those, they're just ads and they're scams, is really important as well, because it's very easy to fall down that trap as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fab. Okay, so that's more or less the end of the content that we had shared. We've intentionally, it's been a bit death by PowerPoint, but we've tried to put loads of content into the slides, and the awareness that if people then weren't able to make it today but wanted to come and go through the slides later, then there's plenty of content in there that they can access. We've just finished with some key takeaways, which we've kind of all talked about today. So to not be afraid of these things, you're going to have to talk about them at some point anyway. So you're better off getting in there a little bit early and just going for it and helping them feel comfortable. And the more comfortable you feel, the more comfortable they'll feel. Try and see these concepts as learning about anything else. So that may feel different. It's you're just educating your child the same way you would about stranger danger, crossing the road, all those other kinds of things. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. So it's just an education process. And it's about helping them do things safely, and that's an education rather than anything else. It's very hard to get it wrong. It is quite hard to get it wrong. I think as long as you have a go, and you try and open the conversation up with them, then you're doing the right thing. And that might not necessarily get the reaction that you're hoping for. You may be met with anger or resistance, but just by opening up the conversation, you're doing it right. So that's our, I guess, our key takeaway is just kind of give it a go. And then, as we've said, prepare yourself by taking the time to identify any resources that maybe you think may be helpful, particularly YouTube. Can be really useful. We normally or historically have always said that school nursing can be a really good resource, but we're aware that in the current day and age, school nursing offers in different schools vary significantly. But I still think it's really important to make sure that you're aware of your school's PSHE program when they're having these conversations, when they're coming up, so that you're able to give a space to your child to talk to them about what they've been taught and answer any questions. And if there is anything that you think school nursing could support your child with in their kind of learning about sexual relationships or puberty, then you explore that resource with your school, depending on what is on offer. But they're a good little team, and they're very helpful, so worth thinking about. Fab. Okay, so that's the end of our content. Thank you so much for coming and asking such wonderful questions, everyone. Maybe we'll just give a moment for if there are any final questions, but
I think
nice to talk to you all.
Wow, thank you is the in the chat. So I can't thank you enough for this. It's been so incredibly useful and lots of really practical ideas, and I know this will be viewed many times, and it'll be something we'll be able to refer parents back to when they ask questions, you know, within our groups and on social media. So it's going to be a really good resource. So thank you for all your time and effort that you've put into it, both of you. We really appreciate it. I guess from our perspective, the only other thing to say is that we're about to start running teen life autism courses after Easter. And so that does cover, not in this much detail, but there are all these different kind of aspects. We have a little bit of information on them and different resources that might help you talk to your young person about it as well. So it's probably just sort of worth flagging that. But mostly, thank you ever so much. I'm going to